All right, everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Liberty Lens. I am your host, Big John, and boy, I've got a smile on my face this week, folks. You know why? My friend and partner, Mr. Mike Termott, has been allowed back into the United States. I don't know what Trump was thinking. I thought they once he was out of the country, they'd keep him out, ladies and gentlemen. But they let him back in anyway, and we could not be happier at that result. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I have said so many warm things about the president lately. That's literally true. That he has every reason to want me to say more, and maybe I can say even more now that I'm back in the United States. The only complaint I have about international travel over the last 10 days is I didn't get my welcome home. As a lot of your audience will know, that when you come back to the United States, the Treasury agent looks at your passport and so often will say, to an American passport holder, welcome home. It sounds a little corny. It's very corny. It sounds very trite and very small, but it's sweet in a sense because, right. You're home and someone officially says welcome home. Well, I didn't get my welcome home because they were checking passports in Dublin before you got on the train. The airplane, although a train would be funnier. Before you get on the airplane, there is a U.S. agent there checking passports. And so he wasn't going to say welcome home then. And then when they dump you in the airport at Dulles, you're ready to go. You just go to your car. So that was a little disappointing.
And for the folks who didn't know, Mike was overseas. We actually, last week's episode featured a direct from Scotland, correct, Mike?
From Edinburgh. We have a nice interview with Anthony Samaroff, a well-known Libertarian podcaster. I'll help make people aware of it. I've also got some material that I'm going to be posting that I think some folks will enjoy. I don't mean my 2 minutes on Iceland, although that is, killer stuff. What I mean is a really excellent interview with a long-term buddy of mine who's an international investment banker in London, an American in London, who has spent a lot of time doing deals all over Europe and, interestingly, and most relevantly, doing a lot of deals in Russia. And has, as Scott, his name is Scott Sheldon, as he would characterize it, a set of unpopular opinions regarding Russia and Gaza that I think folks would enjoy hearing about. So I'll be posting that as well.
That's excellent. And if you didn't catch the interview with Anthony, go ahead and go to distantwarrior.com and check that out. It's still up, folks. It's still being promoted on social media. So check that out as well as all our other content. All right, Mike, since we're still in an international mode, or at least you are, I never leave my house, so I'm always in a domestic mode. But since you're in an international mode still, let's talk about President Trump and his tour of, is it still politically correct to say Asia? Does that work, or do I have to say
it is. You're not allowed to say Oriental when referring to correct. Asian people, John. Yes. But you are allowed to say Asia.
Okay, I'm always not up on the latest. So I knew Oriental I had aged out of Oriental a while ago. I understand that, but Asian, okay, since that's acceptable. Let's talk about President Trump's Asian tour, which included stops in Japan, South Korea. He's got a meeting, I think, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow with President Xi of China. And a lot of this had to do with both trade and security, Mike. So why don't I let you talk and you tell me what's going on with President Trump and what
it's complicated. There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack. First stop was Malaysia, then Japan, then South Korea today, and for a number of reasons. By the way, before we unpack all that, it might be worth mentioning that on the way, using refueling as an excuse, the president stopped to meet with Qatari officials. Fascinating. For those of us who are, let me use the word worried about the relationship with Qatar, this was interesting because it wasn't completely necessary. They do say that a refueling stop is necessary, but he had already stopped to refuel at Ramsden, and German-located American Air Force Base. So I made an extra stop, which is safer, I suppose, from a refueling standpoint, but probably not completely necessary. And this past week, also emerging from New York Times reporting, is a lot to be concerned about with regard to the relationship with the United Arab Emirates in terms of personal investment deals with the Trump family over some period of time, and a great deal of money going back and forth. So there are some concerns here. But having said that, made it to Malaysia, where a preliminary deal was agreed, which would give the United States improved access and Malaysia lower tariffs and investment in the United States. These are the three things that he is typically negotiating for. Access to rare earth minerals, right? Lower tariffs for Malaysian exports, and greater investment in the United States. These are the three things that he's negotiating for with respect to South Korea, Japan. The next stops in those two places are said to have produced agreements. Of course, these are negotiated in advance, as everybody knows. And they're not negotiated all the way down to the dotting of the I's and the crossing of the T's, but these outlines are broadly agreed to. The president expresses his interest in finalizing them, and then the final agreements will be produced on paper over the next days and weeks. But his presence there and demonstrating America's interest in highlighting the importance of these areas cannot be understated. Should not be understated. Very, very important. And we should not miss the fact that these trips and these meetings, and we'll talk about the ASEAN meeting and the APEC meeting as well, these meetings are leading up to what we expect today, maybe already has taken place or is probably taking place as we speak. This is Wednesday early afternoon. A meeting between Trump and Xi of China at the APEC meeting in South Korea. And the reason the order here and the timing matters so much is that the president wants to appear to have as strong a hand as possible in negotiating with Xi. The context is that China produces 90% of the world's rare earth elements that are so critical to high-tech manufacturing, particularly in what we call the dual use sphere. Things that we need for consumer electronics, for automobiles, but also for military hardware, guidance systems, for example, missile guidance systems, for particular example. And so China has been, in effect, throttling our access to these minerals. Well, this is a tough spot to be in because the United States is by far the world's largest consumer of these elements. China is by far the world's dominant producer, not only producer in terms of mining, but possibly just as importantly, the world's producer in terms of processing,
Refinement,
which is enormously complex, expensive, and not the kind of thing that can easily be ramped up by somebody else. So China really has the United States in a fix here. So President Trump has been, good for him, trying to cut deals with others in Asia along the way so that by the time he meets with Xi, he won't feel so under the gun. He still will be under the gun, but it won't feel quite so bad as it would have a couple of weeks ago.
And do you think that the rest of the Asia trip was merely a prelude to the China trip, or was there, do you think, legitimate because you see a lot of things coming out simultaneously in terms of
Yep.
deals struck and
Yep.
tariffs, and I have to tell you that I think the president would be better served with this good news if he hadn't gone off on this uh, tariff jihad to begin with, right? Because now things get confused. Like, are we better off net from before he implemented all of his like trade
Right.
policies, or are we back to the same square one? I mean, so how
Yep.
do you view like leading up to the meeting with the G? Which I understand what you're saying. Like the fact that they control this resource or dominate the world's market for that resource might be concerning and should be concerning just from a trade perspective, and even if you put aside the military angle.
That's right. Either from a trade perspective or from a security perspective. And these things are not easily undone, alleviated
Right.
in a matter of a couple of years.
Right.
It's going to take a decade for us to develop other channels sufficient to provide a stable supply line of these minerals, of these elements, and their processing, right, in sufficient quantities that we could live without a relationship with China if we had to.
Right. It
So this
wasn't
is a big
wasn't
deal.
pa- wasn't part of the rare mineral thing, or I should say, didn't Ukraine we struck
Yeah,
somehow like as part of that, right? But the war's still ongoing there, and I didn't mean to distract, but is the fact that that war is still has not been settled the way we expected it to be by now? Does that impact the negotiation with China for these rare
hugely,
minerals? Right. Right.
hugely. And good for you for bringing it up. Not only is the war a problem,
Right.
but the specific line that may eventually be drawn where a ceasefire is imposed, right,
Right.
is critical because, as bad luck would have it, the vast majority of Ukraine's rare earth minerals are in the east.
Right.
You see where this is going, right?
It would be the part that of the Ukraine that almost certainly would be annexed by Russia.
Potentially. I don't know about almost certainly. It depends on who you ask, whether it's almost certainly or just we hope not.
Right.
But a lot of the rare earth minerals that we need are in land already controlled by Russia. But I understand that a lot is at stake as to whether that line gets advanced, if it's advanced an inch or if it's advanced a mile or if
Right.
it is advanced 200 miles really matters. Like the
Right.
negotiation really matters here, because otherwise you could find yourself out of the frying pan and into the fire. The
Right.
good news is you're not reliant on Russia so much anymore. I mean, on China anymore. You're reliant on Russia. Oh, that's much better. This is
Right.
really going our way. So that is a problem. So it is true that other Asian countries have certain supplies. They don't have the capacity either in a mining sense or in a processing sense, and neither do we.
Right.
This is sort of like petroleum, right? Even if you can get it out of the ground, you've got to process it. And in many cases, the countries that are good at yanking it out of the ground are also good at processing it, but that's not uniformly the case. So we need to be developing both access and processing capacity. So your question is excellent. Is the Asia trip just a prelude? Not completely, in the sense that the calendar determined when the ASEAN meeting was, which is to say Friday or Saturday ago, and the APEC meeting, which is today and tomorrow. The APEC meeting is Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. The ASEAN meeting, the earlier meeting, is much more focused not only on economics, yes, but also has a strong focus on security issues. And these meetings were set 4 days apart, intentionally, with the idea of a lot of people who are attending one going to be attending the other and will be on the road. They attract leaders from all over the Pacific Rim, not just Asian countries. So, Australia, for example, a major player. Mexico, right, for example, major players in terms of economic trade across the Pacific, but also, particularly in the case of someone like Australia, a major player in terms of security. So the calendar sets up these two big meetings. And this allows Xi to attend the APEC meeting without making it look like he's setting up a specific summit just with Trump, right? And it allows Trump to indicate that he may meet with Xi, he may not, right? And this gives him all kinds of flexibility for the weeks leading up to it. So it's a little bit complicated. The other thing that complicates matters and adds a bit of a sense of urgency, in my view, although I haven't heard the White House talking about it, that doesn't mean the White House hasn't been talking about it. I'm just not aware of it. But the other element that adds a sense of urgency is that the Chinese government is going through their 5-year plan writing as we speak. The last plan kicked in early 2021. They want the next plan to kick in 2026. China is obviously a planned economy, but they don't make any bones about that. They don't say, well, we're planned, but we want to hide that fact. We don't act like no. They're very proud of the fact that they're a planned economy. And their 5-year plan, they take very, very seriously. The 5-year plan is something that expresses their political aspirations, their ambitions for influencing geopolitical affairs, particularly in the Pacific area, of course, specifically in Asia, of course, but also around the world. And it also expresses their interest in how they want to do business, trade, how they want to manage their economy, what they want to invest in going forward. And critically, this is where they express their long-term interest in reunification with Taiwan. Well, just this month, they've been writing their 5-year plan, and we don't know exactly what's in it. I hope the CIA knows exactly what's in it. If you're going to spend billions of dollars on a corrupt agency that undermines democracy, I hope we get some value out of the CIA, right? I hope that might have sounded a little nasty, but you get my point, is that I hope at the very least the CIA has a handle of what's being written in this 5-year plan. Well, it's about to be set in concrete over the next few weeks. And it's a very important communications tool. It communicates from the Chinese government to the Chinese people, which sets up a lot of issues for domestic politics there. It communicates from the Chinese government to the rest of the world. And it would be nice if this 5-year plan said things that implied a good relationship with the United States instead of implying a crappy relationship with the United States. That it'd be nice if it implied that we want to keep peace with Taiwan and do business with Taiwan, as opposed to, we want to invade Taiwan by Thursday at 4.
All of Taiwan is ours, or something like that. Yeah. Well, Mike, so to that extent, there's been a lot of bluster, and certainly the president is known for his bluster diplomatically, and he's well known for his deal-making stances. I'm trying to be as nice as I can to the president, right?
Yep.
That he's a tough guy, deal maker. Nobody messes with him, et cetera, et cetera. To the extent and the impact on that 5-year plan as it's being written, as it's being formulated, and obviously the activity leading up to the writing of that 5-year plan and the relationship with the United States. Was the president better served with his with the tact he took, with the hard line, with the tariffs, with the tough talk, were we better served with that in anticipation of China writing their 5-year plan, do you think? Or would
It's
we have been better off with a different approach?
it's not clear, to be fair. It's
Yeah,
not clear at all. The outline of the deal with China that we expect Trump and Xi to reach today suggests that we're merely getting back to the starting line where we were some months ago.
right.
Lowering tariffs, giving up on this idea of the 100% tariff, maybe getting down to, rumors are 55, 35, 15, who knows, and trying to get China to stop throttling our access to rare earth elements, hoping that China helps protect American intellectual property, maybe asking too much at this stage. We're just trying to get back to where we started. So in that sense, things haven't worked out very well. Time will tell, although we'll never really know what would have happened if the Trump administration had come right out of the box and been nice to the PRC, right? Had been nice to the Xi administration. We don't know what that would have looked like, because the Chinese, their government looks like a lot of other governments around the world. They respect force, or at least forcefulness and expression, more than they respect weakness.
Right.
So it may well be that our interests were served in Trump coming right out of the box. And as a counterexample, in fairness to the president, I don't think one would easily argue that our interests have been well served by the Biden administration.
Oh, correct.
Which had kind of, good cop, bad cop going on in the same administration, what I might call bipolar cop, which is to say the Biden administration did not succeed in negotiating for greater protection of American intellectual property, did not succeed in negotiating for greater access to Chinese markets, which may be secondary, but certainly did not come to a long-term understanding regarding our access to these rare earth elements. In fairness, I don't think we understood 5 years ago as clearly as we do now how critical this is. But in fairness to the Trump administration, it was the Biden administration's job to understand how important that was. And they were asleep at the switch. It just, there's no getting around that. They were asleep at the switch. So we found ourselves in a crummy situation. The other half of the bipolar cop scenario is, at the same time, Biden was out there saying, yeah, we're willing to go to war with China over Taiwan, right? And his administration was trying to backfill, saying the president didn't really mean it. And then a few days would go by and Biden said it all over again. I think he said it a total of 3 times just for increased clarity, right?
Right.
That we were willing to go to war over microchips. Well, there can scarcely be a more important issue to the 5-year plan or the Chinese government or to Xi personally than Taiwan, right? He cannot appear weak on Taiwan. So if you want to do a deal, it does not help you to come out of the box and say, Taiwan's an independent country, and if China tries to repatriate it, we're going to go to war, right? That's not going to float the boat. There are those who would argue that by threatening war with China, you increase the probability that China will use military force to get a first mover advantage. Right. Okay. So, in fairness to the Trump administration, they're coming on the heels of a program that didn't work very well. What we're looking for in the long run is a combination of access to markets that is stable and and a status quo affirmation regarding Taiwan. It's not going to work to say the United States demands that China doesn't use force against Taiwan. I think what we want is for everyone to make an expression of cooperation and a pledge that we want to do everything we can to keep this peaceful. That's all you're really hoping for. This is the idea behind strategic ambiguity, which I've always thought was dopey, and I still do. I think that we should be more clear, but it's the reason why we've been stuck in a policy of strategic ambiguity.
Right.
Given that we've been pursuing strategic ambiguity for so long, a lot of investors have assumed that the United States would go to war to protect Taiwan. Okay, this means that investment in Taiwan has been probably, from a geopolitical sense and American interest, probably more than we would have preferred. Because now, not only does China have us over a barrel in terms of access to these rare earth minerals, but Taiwan has us over a barrel with regard to our access to chips.
Right.
We should have been developing for a decade. And again, to be fair, people didn't understand a certain number of years ago that we would need so many chips, that we would need a particular type of high-end chip because AI was about to explode. People didn't understand that a few years ago. But we should have been developing over the past decade a capability to access these chips from someone besides one supplier, no matter who it was. And for the dominant supplier not to be someone that the PRC is willing to go to war with to avoid them declaring independence. I think most people that watch this situation believe that the moment Taiwan says, we're unilaterally declaring that we're independent, we're always going to be independent, we'll do anything to maintain that independence. The moment that they are that clear is the moment that China invades.
Right.
So they need some strategic ambiguity. That doesn't mean that we do. We should have been pursuing access to markets the past decade so that, these two countries, whether you call them two countries or one, these two places wouldn't have us over a barrel for two different reasons. So what we're negotiating for really is time to develop access to these two critical markets without these two nations, countries, places going to war.
And that, and at some point your head spins at all the possibilities and the permutations and the combinations of what might happen, what you need to do to prepare yourself. So this is not to suggest any simple solution, right? It's not as simple as, oh, we need free markets or we need regulated. It's not as simple as that. In terms of execution, in terms of first principles, yeah, I think it's fairly simple, but in terms of execution.
Yeah, we would be better off if the leaders of these two nations had gone to the University of Chicago for advanced degrees in economics. That would probably put us in a better spot, right?
Right.
But, it's not Taiwan's fault that they've monopolized these chips. I mean,
right.
One might argue good for them.
Hey, they essentially cornered a market. That's every, capitalist dream when you start a company, right?
And ironically, the PRC has achieved the capitalist dream in cornering the market on the rare earth minerals. They were born into it, but they have done a good job in developing the ability to process these. Very foresighted.
So as we look forward to today's or tomorrow's meeting with President Xi, between President Xi and President Trump, how what's your sense of how it's going to progress? Is it going to, I mean, not what they necessarily show the world, right? But I'm saying, like, okay, you've got these two guys. Trump, we know about as Americans. Maybe take half a step, Mike. How is President Xi regarded, like, by people outside the PRC? Is he viewed as like a hard ass? Is he viewed as someone who's willing to negotiate? Is he reasonable? Is he unreasonable? What's the characterization of Xi outside of his homeland.
Yeah, he's viewed as reasonable, but very much from the Chinese perspective, right? So,
Right.
he's got a little bit of Trump in him, in that he doesn't trust a lot of international organizations to pursue his interests, right?
Right.
He wants to be large, in charge, and in control. He's also an incrementalist. And so he's, sort of opposite in Trump in this sense. He's playing a long game. He does not have a constitution that says that he has to be out of power by 2028.
Right.
Even if he did, even if he decides to quit tomorrow, this is a one-party regime. They're all on the same page.
Right.
Their 5-year plan is not being, fought out by people punching each other in the face.
Right.
At least not over the biggest issues. This is a very nuanced process. So even if Xi steps down, he's going to be replaced by another incrementalist who's very much a nationalist, who wants to see China progress in terms of controlling its own destiny, both economically and in terms of security. It's not, the Belt and Road Initiative is a good example, where China has spent literally trillions, the equivalent of trillions of dollars, to build up their ability to develop trade relationships around the world, whether it's train tracks or ports or ships or trains. They've been developing trade relationships around the world. Now, as an economist, I think I would argue I don't want to bet on 20th century technology, which is essentially what they have been doing. But having said that, it's not like Xi had to shove this down the throat of a Senate that was having trouble getting 60 votes, right? This is a guy who heads up a single party. Everybody's on the same page. And so he's very strong domestically. That doesn't mean he doesn't have domestic political challenges. He does. But he's very strong domestically. He doesn't have to be constantly looking over his shoulder the way an American politician would. He can play the long game. And he does play the long game. So he could outlast Trump if he wants to, if he needs to. He could outlast almost anybody. They're playing a 50-year game, one 5-year plan at a time.
Right. Whereas we can't figure out how to get to the next election cycle.
Next election cycle, we can't get our government open this week, right?
Right.
We have a tariff policy that goes from 10% to 50% to 100% over the course of a couple of months.
Right.
We can't get our government open to either pay the troops or congressionally mandated welfare payments.
Right.
So no, we're complete polar opposites in this sense.
And to the extent that, look, in terms of how it affects the negotiations, like one thing that enters my mind is, look, Trump has been caught on hot mics, and I think his admiration for Xi, when I say admiration for Xi, I mean as a leader, the way he's viewed as a leader in his own country, right? He likes the fact that people, what did he say once? He goes, I want people to stand at attention when I enter a room. They do the way they do for Xi. His authority is unquestioned. I need that, like President Xi, right? Do you think that plays as, I mean, look, outwardly, up until now, it's been very much a conflicted relationship, right? Like they seem to be especially from the Trump perspective, to be at odds with each other, right? But do you think deep down, not to oversimplify it, do you think that when these two get in a room together, and I mean really negotiate, not for the cameras, is it a matter of two strong men kind of like winking at each other and saying, we kind of know where this is headed? Or do you feel it actually makes negotiations more difficult if these are the two leading figures? Does it make it more difficult because they might be so much alike?
That is an interesting question when it comes down to personalities. By the way, the cringiest moment so far was watching the president being presented by a head of state with apparently replica of a gold crown. I'll
Oh,
let
is
your
that
audience look it up. I don't want to
yeah.
talk about it, but the implication was that we understand that this is the kind of thing that you would appreciate. I don't think it was a good look for the American administration. But to your point, do they have similar personalities? Maybe from the strongman sense of demanding attention. However,
Yeah.
you come to power in the United States off of a certain amount of populism. The job of the president of the United States is to make people like you.
Right.
That's the job. And the job of a candidate to get there is to make people like you. Let's, call it like it is. That's the nature of the job. The nature of the job in China is to very slowly advance Chinese interests. And the way that you get to power in China is to demonstrate that you have your eye on these tried and true principles, that you understand the intersection between the Chinese way of doing business and the modern world. And that's a very different animal. It's a very, very different animal. So without knowing either one of these guys personally, I would not estimate that they necessarily have a great deal in common personality-wise. On the other hand, they're both smart enough to know what the other guy's interest is. So Trump knows that Xi wants incremental advancement in his ability to control, to be in charge of his own fate, his nation's own fate, especially in the region.
Right.
And Xi is smart enough to know that Trump wants to announce a deal. In that sense, I think that they ought to be smart enough to arrange a deal, right? There's enough deal to be had. There's a tremendous amount of deal to be had. Two giant economies, giant military interests, very different ways of approaching the economy. There is plenty of deal to be had. Imagine, use your imagination, be creative, right? Which I don't believe is Xi's forte. I think it's a little bit Trump's forte, but be creative. Imagine how good it would be for us if Xi would promise to do a couple of things that he's apparently reticent to do. One is to initiate a convention that would, a set of protocols that would protect American intellectual property, European intellectual property, other Japanese intellectual property. Imagine if he would turn the corner on that issue. Imagine. Not only would investors all over the world view him as a modernist, but it would immediately indicate that China is a place where you can do business and where you want to invest.
I was going to say it would open up their market like
huge. One of the big
faucet.
problems the Chinese economy for foreigners is that it's so hard to do business there, and you see investments made and then investments lost. People will go and eventually they just throw up their hands. It's not just the paperwork, but the government demands the transfer of technology. Sometimes you can tolerate it, sometimes you can't. Imagine, number two, imagine if Xi were to agree to another convention, a set of protocols that would attempt to thwart ostensibly private sector cyber attacks against the United States and Europe and Japan and the rest of the world. This is something that he has been very hesitant to do. Same thing in Russia, where the government views these capabilities as being part and parcel of their military prowess. In my view, this attitude is short-sighted. These governments need to get the private sector under control and make sure it does their bidding, or in the long run, it will undermine their ability to control it when they need it. And this is a huge problem. A great proportion of the cyber attacks that go on in the United States originates in China. This is a big problem. Just those two things alone would signal that Xi is ready to enter the 21st century. And I just don't think he has done that yet in terms of priority and in terms of understanding how things work and how his economy can become modernized and how it should work.
Which is, to your point, interesting, because could he achieve that and still maintain the control that he needs?
I don't know the answer. That's what leadership is all about. And to the point of your earlier question about personality, I don't know that Xi is a leader in the sense that Trump is, right? Say what you will about Donald Trump. There's no getting around the fact that he is a almost incredible leader, right? People follow him.
Right. Without a doubt.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Whereas Xi is, he's a team player. He's the kind of guy who makes you feel good about the team. Oh, we're glad we're on the team. He's not there to ruffle feathers. He's there to get the job done one step at a time. So is he the guy who's going to come up with creative solutions and sell them back home domestically? Probably not, right? Probably not. And to his disadvantage. I think that this whole Belt and Roads initiative is in the long run a bad idea. And I think it's part and parcel of what you get when you run an economy centrally. Right. And when you run an economy centrally by a group of people who think it's a good idea to run the economy centrally. In other words.
Yeah. And honestly, without going off on too much of a tangent, that's the danger we find ourselves in, I think, more and more, trying to run the economy centrally. But that having been said, let's kind of wrap this up. What is your expectation for the Trump-Xi meeting? Do you think anything substantive will get done, or do you think it'll be just like we talked, we didn't come to any agreements, and we're scheduling another one soon?
I think both. It'll be substantive in the sense that it gets us back to where we were in February, and that's a good thing. Let's be clear, sure. That's a good thing. I wish that it would be the first step toward a better long-term relationship.
Yeah.
That's not easy. I will sit on the edge of my seat until we hear how the 5-year plan winks and nods toward the United States, toward Taiwan, toward markets, toward development, toward investment, toward the Belt and Road Initiative, toward AI, toward their attitude regarding cooperation rather than competition. All these are really fundamental things that I think will be tipped a little bit in that 5-year plan. Whether Trump can affect that or not, I would not be terribly optimistic. If I were Xi, I would view any American president as a short-term phenomenon. What can I get out of this guy in the short run as one more step in our 50-year plan, right? So I don't think you're going to see anything terribly dramatic. But like I said, I don't know that you need anything terribly dramatic. I think you need to freeze things the way they are, the way they were in February. Sure. Let's get back to there. And freeze the status quo so that the United States can start developing access to markets outside of China and outside of Taiwan. And hopefully, over time, the prospect of a war between China and Taiwan will look like less and less a good idea, even from the PRC perspective.
Right. bring the whole world to bear in essence and say it's not a good idea.
Yeah, that's kind of what you're hoping for. Now, something that you and I think you were just alluding to, and something you and I have talked about in the past, does that imply a little bit of American government interventionism in our markets, in our economy, in helping, pushing, cajoling, incentivizing the development of access to these markets internationally, other places besides Taiwan and China? I think the answer is yes. And I think that's going to make a lot of libertarians' heads explode. I think it's going to make my head explode, your head explode. But I think we're up against it.
Now, see, because I'm not going to give up my libertarianism, that my free market love that easily, Mike. But by interventionism, do you actually mean the removal of all traces of government intervention in that sense, even if it's targeted for these quote critical industries in these quote critical markets? When
Yeah.
you say interventionism or incentives, right? Is that actually addition through subtraction by saying we're removing all the barriers to trade, we're removing all the regulations to trade in order to encourage, even if it's targeted, only the people interested in chip making get full free market access to the rest of the world? Because that to me might be considered interventionism or incentivizing on the part of the government, but it's actually getting back to the roots of what should be a truly unfettered, free, voluntary market. It's just that you're limiting it. It's the opposite. You would be
Yeah, I get it.
limiting government, right?
I think that's a really happy way to describe potential. I don't think that will come to pass.
Okay.
Uh,
I gotta
nor,
try, Mike. You know that. I
no,
gotta try.
that was, I mean, that was a valiant effort. I loved hearing it. Nor do I know, am I convinced that it would be fast enough given the reality of the situation,
Right.
given the years that have gone by, given how long it took to get to where we are, right? We're in a really, really bad situation now. Like, our security is absolutely threatened. At least our economic security,
Right,
is absolutely threatened. I think that serious consideration should be given to subsidizing, let me use that as a blanket term, the development of access to other markets. Subsidizing can take place in any number of ways, and I would be open to discussing virtually every one of them, because we can't effectively survive with Taiwan monopolizing our access to chips. This is not a tolerable situation. We cannot be tolerating this. We need access to chips either domestically or in a free market sense, produced by an ally, produce somebody who's less likely to go to war with Taiwan, less likely to go to war with the PRC. And maybe the only way to identify that is someone who doesn't have a planned economy, right? We need access to rare earth minerals. We need access to the processing of them. And we need that access to be either domestic, and that's not an option for these rare earth minerals, or at the very least through, again, an ally or a non-centrally planned economy. And this is one of those all ideas on deck moments. You're going to have to think outside the libertarian box. This is a problem for our economy as a whole.
right.
It's a real security threat. I'm all for a private sector solution to this, right? It's time to convene the CEOs who matter and get everyone on the same page. But if there's not going to be a CEO who steps up and coordinates that, it's going to have to be the federal government. it brings no joy to any libertarian to say that. But this is not a joyful situation in which we find ourselves today.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like sometimes you come to these moments, like you said, a bad idea whose time has come, which I love that. I love that phrase, Mike. You should patent that. Get a nickel every time I use it. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense that we have to, if we're going to stay on the path we're on, which is a world leader, the world's largest economy, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this needs to be resolved. Whether it's like you said, ramping up domestic production, I don't know, making the Ukraine our 51st state so we could get its rare earth materials and, you know, whatever the case may be there. Which again, I go back to that is interesting. You know, knowing the bind we're in, uh, you could have exerted more diplomatic pressure to keep those rare earth materials with an ally as opposed to someone who is not allied with you, like the way
All
Russia
the
is.
more reason to keep Ukraine as an ally.
Yeah, that's what I meant, exactly. And then domestically, in terms of production, in terms of chips and stuff, yeah, yeah, give them, you know, what used to be, what was it during the Reagan years? Enterprise zones. What were they called, Mike? I forget.
Yeah, yeah,
Tax
absolutely.
transfer,
Enterprise zones, they were a federal idea, and in many states they were idea. By the way, an idea that went badly many times. You know, there are people listening to us right now with gray hair. They're
right.
So that it's you know, that's not a silver bullet, but we're gonna have to come up with one.
Yeah, we're gonna have to come up with something. I just wish it didn't involve as much strong arming. That's my
Oh,
that's just my one major
from your
lament,
lips
right?
to God's ears.
Somehow. All right, everyone, we've come to the end of this episode of Liberty Lens. You know, diplomacy and economics, an episode made, let's face it, for true nerds. This was a nerding out episode, Mike, to try to get to some sense of what's going on with Trump's Asia trip. And thank you. I learned something here to understand the nuance of a lot of
Oh,
what's
thank
going
you. It was a
on.
lot
Yeah.
of fun to talk about it.
All right. And join us again next week right here at Liberty Lens when I'll be joined by my host, Mike Termat, when we pick another subject to focus on, especially for those interested in liberty. Until then, this has been Big John. Peace, everyone.